When my cousins laughed at my old car, I smiled like it did not hurt, even though something quiet cracked inside my chest that day, and I remember the sound of their laughter more clearly than the sound of the engine that barely started. I am telling this story now in a calm voice, not because it no longer matters, but because time has softened the sharp edges and taught me how to speak without anger. Back then, I was the kind of person who believed silence was safer than explanation, and that day began like many others, slow and ordinary, with the sun rising gently over my small rented house. I washed my face at the sink, drank tea from a chipped cup, and looked at my reflection, telling myself that a simple life was not a shameful one. The car was parked outside, old, faded blue, with scratches that told stories I never shared. It had been with me for years, through long nights, rainy mornings, and quiet drives when I needed to think. To others, it looked like failure on four wheels, but to me, it was steady and loyal, much like the life I was trying to build. That morning, I was driving to a family gathering, one of those events where people smile too much and listen too little. The road was familiar, the radio played softly, and I practiced calm breathing because I already knew what awaited me. My cousins had always been louder, richer, faster in life, at least on the surface. They drove shiny cars, spoke about money as if it were air, and measured people by what they wore and owned. I parked my car at the side of the house away from the front, but it did not matter. They saw it, they always did. As soon as I stepped inside, greetings were exchanged, plates were filled, and then the jokes began, soft at first, like testing the water. One cousin smiled and said, "You still have that car," as if asking about an old illness. Another laughed and said, "It is vintage now," and the room joined in with polite laughter that felt heavy on my shoulders. I smiled, nodded, and said nothing. Inside, my heart wanted to explain, to say that I chose this life, that I was building something quietly, that not all success makes noise. But I stayed silent, because in my experience, explanations only invite more questions, and questions lead to judgment. I sat at the table, ate slowly, and listened to stories about new houses, new deals, and new plans. They spoke with confidence, and I listened with patience. Sometimes they asked me what I was doing, and I answered simply, working, because the truth felt too small for their ears. What they did not know was that every night after my regular job, I worked again, learning, planning, saving, and dreaming in silence. I had learned early in life that loud dreams attract unwanted opinions, so I kept mine hidden, like a letter never sent. The house felt warm, but the air between us felt distant, like we were speaking different languages. When someone joked again about my car, I excused myself and stepped outside. The sky was turning gray, and a light rain had begun, soft enough to feel like a whisper. I stood beside my car and ran my hand along its worn door, feeling comfort instead of shame. This car had never laughed at me. It had carried me when no one else did. I sat inside for a moment, listening to the rain tapping on the roof, and allowed myself to feel the sadness I had been holding back. It was not just about the car. It was about being unseen, misunderstood, and reduced to appearances. I remembered being younger, when we all sat on the same floor, shared the same food, and dreamed simple dreams. Somewhere along the way, money had changed the tone of our voices and the way we looked at each other. I did not hate them for it. I only felt tired. When I returned inside, the laughter had moved on to another topic, and I blended back into the background. By the end of the evening, goodbyes were said, and I drove home slowly, the rain still falling, the road quiet. That night, as I lay in bed, I did not cry. I stared at the ceiling and made a quiet promise to myself. I would continue on my path, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I would let time speak for me, because time, unlike people, is patient and fair. I did not know then how life would turn, or how those same voices would one day sound different. All I knew was that my old car waited outside, and tomorrow, like every day, I would keep moving forward, one quiet mile at a time. Life after that gathering returned to its quiet rhythm, but something inside me had shifted, like a clock that had started ticking louder even though no one else could hear it. And every morning when I started my old car, I reminded myself that patience was also a form of strength. My days were simple on the surface. I worked a regular job, greeted people politely, and returned home before sunset. But my nights belonged to another version of me, one that my cousins did not know existed. After dinner, I would sit at a small table near the window, with a notebook, a cup of tea, and a tired but focused mind. I had always loved cars, not for how they looked, but for how they worked, how metal and motion came together to solve problems. Years ago, I noticed how many people struggled with fair auto repairs, honest pricing, and reliable service. Friends complained. Neighbors complained. Even strangers shared stories of being cheated or ignored. I listened quietly, and instead of complaining with them, I started learning. I read manuals, watched videos, asked questions, and saved every small amount of money I could. My old car became my classroom. I fixed it slowly, part by part, learning with my hands and my mistakes. Some nights I failed and slept with greasy hands and a heavy head. Other nights I succeeded and smiled alone in the dark. No one clapped, no one noticed. And that was fine. Slowly, opportunities appeared, not loudly but gently. A neighbor asked if I could look at his car. I helped him, charged little, and he told someone else. Another person came, then another. I did not call it a business, it was just help. Word spread quietly like a secret passed with trust. I saved more. I learned more. I rented a small space at the edge of town, barely big enough for 2 cars and a desk. I named it simply, using my own name, nothing fancy. I kept my regular job because I was not brave enough yet to jump fully and because I believed in steady steps. Some evenings when I locked up the garage and drove home in my old car, I felt something close to peace. I was building something real, even if it was invisible to my family. At family events, the jokes continued. Still driving that, they would say. You should upgrade. I nodded and smiled. Inside, I was learning not to shrink from their words but also not to fight them. I realized something important during that time. People who speak loudly about success often do so because silence scares them. I chose silence because it gave me room to grow. Months passed, then years. The small garage grew into a proper workshop. I hired one person, then two. Customers trusted us. I focused on honesty, fair prices, and listening, things I once wished for as a customer myself. The old car still waited outside every night, paint dull, engine faithful. I could afford a new one, but I did not buy it. Not yet. It reminded me of who I was and how far I had come. Meanwhile, my cousins' lives looked perfect from the outside. New cars appeared often. Big houses were shown proudly. Social media posts were full of smiles and celebrations. At gatherings, their voices filled the room. They talked about deals, risks, and success, sometimes complaining about stress, but always with pride. I listened and learned, not from their words, but from their tone. I noticed how rushed they were, how often their phones buzzed, how tired their eyes looked when no one was watching. I did not judge them. I understood that every path has its weight. Then came a year when things changed quietly but deeply. The economy shifted, costs rose, customers became careful. I adapted slowly, offering flexible plans focusing on trust. We survived. Some competitors did not. One morning, as I sat at my desk reviewing numbers, I realized my small operation had grown into a proper auto company. Not large, not famous, but stable, profitable, honest. I leaned back in my chair and felt a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. I thought of that day in the rain, of the laughter of my silence. I still told no one. Not out of pride, but because I wanted my success to stay clean, untouched by comparison. Around that time, family gatherings became less frequent. Life pulled us in different directions. When we did meet, the jokes softened, replaced by distracted conversations. No one asked much about my work anymore. Perhaps they assumed nothing had changed. I let them believe that. I still arrived in my old car, parked it away from the front, and joined the table quietly. And then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was a cousin I had not spoken to in months. His voice sounded different. Slower. Careful. He asked how I was, spoke about weather and family, and then paused. In that pause, I felt the story turning, like a page being slowly lifted. I listened, calm and silent, just as I had learned to be, unaware that the quiet road I had chosen was about to cross loudly with theirs. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing feels important until it suddenly is. And when I saw my cousin's name on the screen, I hesitated before answering because something in my chest felt heavy without reason. His voice sounded unfamiliar, softer, slower, as if he were walking on thin ice with every word. He did not joke. He did not rush. He asked how I was, spoke about family, about time passing too quickly, and then there was a long silence that said more than his words. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked just enough for me to hear the truth hiding behind it. Things were not going well. A business decision had gone wrong. Then another. Payments were stacking up, and doors that once opened easily were now closed. He talked around the problem, careful not to say too much, like someone afraid that admitting weakness might make it permanent. I listened quietly, leaning back in my chair, my eyes resting on the wall where years of quiet work were reflected in simple order. When he finally asked if I knew anyone who could help him with a loan, I closed my eyes for a brief second, not because I was angry, but because memory came rushing in. I remembered the laughter, the jokes, the way my old car became a symbol of who they thought I was. I did not remind him of any of it. I simply told him to come and see me when he had time. A few days later, he arrived at my office. I watched him step inside slowly, his eyes scanning the space with confusion, then surprise, then something close to disbelief. The clean floors, the quiet movement of staff, the steady hum of work happening behind glass walls. It did not match the picture he had carried of me for years. He looked at me and asked, carefully, if this place belonged to me. I nodded. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with things neither of us said. He sat down, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time he spoke honestly. He talked about the pressure of always needing to look successful, about borrowing to maintain an image, about how fast things fall apart when pride leads the way. I listened without judgment. I did not interrupt. I knew that pain does not need correction, it needs space. When he finished, I spoke calmly, telling him my story again, but this time with clarity. I explained how I started small, how I kept my plans quiet, how I chose steady progress over fast applause. I showed him numbers, contracts, and plans, not to impress him but to be transparent. I made it clear that if I helped, it would be as a business agreement with clear terms and mutual respect. He nodded, relief and humility mixing on his face. Word traveled quickly after that, as it always does in families. Another cousin called, then another, each voice carrying the same careful tone, the same hesitation, the same unspoken memory of past laughter. They asked questions they once mocked. They spoke with respect they once withheld. I helped where it made sense and refused where it did not, learning that kindness does not mean sacrificing boundaries. At the next family gathering, the atmosphere had changed. My old car was still there, parked quietly at the side, unchanged and patient. But this time, no one laughed. Conversations softened when I entered the room. Someone mentioned my auto company in passing, as if it had always been common knowledge. I smiled and redirected the conversation, not wanting attention, only peace. Later that evening, the cousin who first called me stepped outside with me. The air was cool and the sky was calm. He looked at my car, then at me, and apologized without excuses. He said he had been wrong, not just about the car, but about how he measured people. I accepted his apology with a nod, because forgiveness does not need drama. As I drove home that night, the familiar sound of the engine filled the quiet road, and I realized something important. I did not feel victorious. I felt balanced. The humiliation had passed without turning me bitter. The success had arrived without changing who I was. And in that moment, I understood that the greatest twist in my story was not that they needed me, but that I no longer needed their approval. The weeks after that gathering passed quietly, but something in my heart had settled into a deeper calm, the kind that comes only after a long inner storm finally ends. I returned to my routine, opening the office early, checking in with my team, and spending time on the floor where real work happened. Nothing dramatic changed on the outside. I still drove my old car. I still ate simple meals. But inside, there was a new sense of peace, not because I had proven anything to anyone, but because I no longer felt the need to. The loans I agreed to were handled professionally, with clear terms and respect on both sides. Some cousins repaid slowly, learning patience for the first time. Others struggled and had to make difficult adjustments. I watched all of it from a steady distance, offering guidance when asked, but never stepping beyond my boundaries. I learned that helping people grow is very different from saving them from their choices. Over time, the tone of our family interactions continued to change. Conversations became quieter, more honest. There was less showing off and more listening. At one dinner, someone joked gently about my car, but the laughter that followed was warm, not sharp. I smiled, and for the first time it did not sting. One afternoon, a younger cousin visited my office, curious and nervous. He asked how I started, not with envy but with hope. I told him the truth in simple words. Start small, stay honest, and do not rush success just to impress people who are not walking your path. He nodded as if holding on to something important. Moments like that reminded me why my journey mattered beyond money. Months later, after careful thought, I finally bought a new car. It was not flashy. It was practical and reliable. The old car sat beside it for a while before I sold it to a young man who needed something dependable. As he drove away, I felt gratitude, not loss. That car had done its job. At the next family gathering, I arrived in the new car and parked it in the same quiet spot. No one made a big deal out of it. And that felt right. That evening, as I sat at the table, surrounded by familiar faces, I realized how much had changed without loud announcements or dramatic confrontations. Respect had grown slowly, the way real things do. When I drove home that night, the road felt open and calm. I thought about the years of silence, the laughter, the patience, and the quiet work. I understood then that life does not reward noise, it rewards consistency. The lesson I carry now is simple and gentle. Do not rush to explain yourself to people who are not ready to understand. Let your work speak. Let time correct false judgments. And when success comes, hold it softly, because its true purpose is not to stand above others, but to stand firmly within yourself.